Family suggests that the husband have a baby with another woman because his wife couldn't get pregnant. Turns out the problem wasn't the wife this whole time. Maya had always known that marrying into Daniel's family would be an adjustment. His family was large, tight-knit, and steeped in traditions she was still learning to navigate. Although his parents and siblings were outwardly polite, there was an undercurrent of tension she couldn't quite ignore, as though her presence disrupted some unspoken balance they held dear. She first brought it up to Daniel, not long after their wedding. They were sitting in their cozy living room on a sunny afternoon, the kind of lazy day that allowed them to just be together in their little bubble, untouched by the outside world. But something had been bothering Mia, gnawing at her since their last family visit, and she felt she couldn't keep it to herself any longer. "Daniel," she began, hesitantly picking at the corner of a throw pillow, "I don't think your family is happy with me." Daniel looked up from his laptop, surprised. His brow furrowed slightly, the relaxed smile on his face fading. "What? Why would you say that? They love you, Mia." She shrugged, trying to find the right words. "It's just small things. The way your mom always has something to say about how I do things, even when it's something silly, and Julia, she barely talks to me unless she has to." Daniel smiled softly, as if the answer were simple. "Babe, that's just how they are. Mom's always critical about everything, even with me. And Julia, well, she's been that way with everyone, not just you. You really don't need to worry. They mean well." Maya nodded, forcing a smile, wanting to believe him. After all, she loved Daniel, and maybe he was right. Maybe she was being too sensitive, letting the normal awkwardness of being the new person in the family get to her. But despite her best efforts, that uneasy feeling lingered, and as the months passed, it grew harder to ignore. The family's subtle comments, once easy to brush off, began to accumulate, forming a pattern that left Maya feeling increasingly out of place. Like at that last family dinner when Ellen had laughed and casually remarked that Mia probably wasn't used to large family gatherings, making Mia's smaller, more private upbringing sound like some kind of deficiency. Ellen had laughed, but the comment stung, a reminder that no matter how hard Maya tried, she would always be different. Julia's silence, meanwhile, was louder than words. At every family event, she barely acknowledged Mia, her cold stares and distant demeanor making it clear that Mia wasn't part of her inner circle. And unlike with Ellen, there was no pretense of kindness. Julia's disapproval was open, unapologetic. But still, Maya tried. When they were invited to a Sunday lunch at Daniel's parents' house, Maya decided to bring a dish her way of showing she could contribute, that she wasn't as out of place in their family as they might think. She spent hours perfecting the casserole, wanting it to be just right, and felt a flicker of pride as she set it on the kitchen counter when they arrived. In the living room, Daniel had already joined his brothers, engrossed in conversation, so Maya lingered in the hallway for a moment, overhearing Ellen and Julia as they tasted her dish. For a fleeting second, hope swelled in her chest as she heard Ellen's initial approval. "This is nice," Ellen said thoughtfully, and Julia agreed, her tone almost surprised. "Yeah, it's good. Who made it?" Maya smiled to herself, relief washing over her. But then came the familiar shift, the subtle cooling of their voices. "It's Mia's," Ellen said, followed by a pause. Oh, that small word carried all the weight of their judgment. The compliments stopped cold. "Well, it's okay," Ellen added, her voice suddenly indifferent. "A little too salty, though, and the texture is off. Maybe she's not used to cooking for so many people." Julia chuckled, her laugh more biting than lighthearted. "Yeah, it's not really something we'd usually have at family gatherings." Maya stood frozen in the hallway, the brief warmth she had felt moments ago quickly extinguished. She tried to shake off the disappointment. "It's just food," she told herself. "It's nothing." But the sting lingered, as did the growing certainty that no matter what she did, it wouldn't be enough for them. On the drive home, she hesitantly brought up the incident to Daniel, her voice soft, not wanting to start a fight but needing him to understand how she felt. "They didn't like it, did they?" she asked, trying to sound casual, though the hurt seeped through. Daniel sighed, his fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel. "Don't let it get to you, Mia. You know how my mom is. She's critical of everything. It's just her way." "But it wasn't just that," Mia pressed gently. "It's the way they talk to me. It feels like no matter what I do, it's wrong." Daniel glanced over at her, his brow furrowing. "You're overthinking it. They like you, Mia. They wouldn't have invited us over if they didn't. You've got to give it more time." Maya nodded, retreating into silence, but deep down, she wasn't sure time would change anything. At the next family event, Mia's suspicions only grew. Daniel's family had invited his brother and sister-in-law, Emma, and as soon as she walked in, Mia couldn't help but notice the stark contrast in how Emma was treated. Ellen greeted Emma with genuine warmth, her face lighting up as she complimented her outfit. Julia, too, seemed a completely different person, chatting easily with Emma, laughing with her over inside jokes, pulling her into the fold with an effortless familiarity. They shared stories, memories Maya had never been part of, and as she stood on the edge of the conversation, she felt more like a stranger than ever. When Mia arrived, Ellen had given her the same quick, perfunctory hug as always, and Julia had barely acknowledged her presence. The difference in their behavior was glaring, and it was impossible not to feel the weight of it. Emma was the golden daughter-in-law, the one who belonged, while Mia was merely tolerated. It wasn't just in her head anymore. The contrast was too obvious to ignore. Mia watched as Emma slipped so easily into the family dynamic, laughing with Ellen, exchanging knowing glances with Julia. And as the evening went on, Mia couldn't shake the gnawing ache in her chest, the loneliness of feeling like an outsider in the family she had hoped to call her own. Later that night, lying in bed beside Daniel, she wondered if things would ever change, if she would ever truly be accepted, or if she was destined to always feel like she was on the outside looking in. Emma was praised for her contributions to the meal, her style, even the way she and her husband interacted. Mia, on the other hand, always felt scrutinized every word. Every action seemed to be judged, with either a passive comment from Ellen or a silent, disapproving glance from Julia. As the day wore on, Maya's discomfort grew. She felt like she was being compared to Emma in every way, and she was constantly found lacking. It became clearer that this wasn't just how the family was something deeper, something personal. The growing tension between Mia and his family wasn't lost on Daniel. After a particularly uncomfortable dinner, where Ellen had made another thinly veiled critique about how Maya handled a household task, Daniel took action. "We're not going over there as often anymore," he said one evening, as they sat on the couch, the soft glow of the TV flickering in the background. "I don't like how they've been treating you. We'll start spending more time with just the two of us." Mia was grateful for his support, but the shift in family dynamics only seemed to fuel more resentment from his relatives. Ellen began making comments to Daniel, subtly accusing Maya of keeping him away from them. Julia started implying that Mia was trying to isolate Daniel from his family, and while these accusations were never said directly to Maya's face, she felt the weight of them in every interaction. After months of distancing themselves from Daniel's family, the couple decided to start trying for a baby. For Maya, this was a deeply personal decision, and she wanted to keep it private until they had something to announce. Daniel, however, was too excited to keep it to himself. He shared the news with his mother during one of their rare visits. Ellen's reaction surprised Maya. For the first time in what felt like forever, she saw genuine excitement in her mother-in-law's eyes. Ellen smiled, hugged her son tightly, and told him how much she had been looking forward to having a grandchild. For a brief moment, Maya thought that perhaps things might change, but months went by, and Maya still wasn't pregnant. The once celebratory atmosphere turned cold again as the family began subtly pressuring them for updates. One afternoon, as they sat around the dinner table, Julia made a comment that cut Mia to the core. "You know," Julia said casually, swirling her wine glass, "if Daniel had married my best friend instead, I bet they'd have kids by now." The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Mia felt her heart drop, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to process what she had just heard. Julia's best friend, Daniel's ex-girlfriend, had been the subject of quiet conversations for years, but Mia had never thought the family still held her in such high regard. Daniel froze, his eyes darting to Maya, filled with a mixture of anger and guilt. But before he could respond, Ellen chimed in, her voice calm and measured. "Well, we can't dwell on the past, Julia. Let's hope for the best with Maya and Daniel." She smiled at Mia, but there was a thin edge to it. That night, Daniel finally revealed the truth. His mother and sister had never truly approved of their marriage. They had always believed that Daniel's ex was the one, and his decision to marry Mia had shattered their hopes of a perfect union. That was why they had been so cold, why every gathering had felt like a subtle battlefield. Maya felt a rush of emotions, anger, hurt, and betrayal. All this time, she had been trying to win over a family that had never wanted her to be part of it. And now, with their struggles to conceive, the hostility was becoming unbearable. The breaking point came at yet another tense family dinner. Julia, emboldened by a few glasses of wine, made a proposal that left Maya speechless. "If you can't have kids," Julia said, her voice cutting through the room, "maybe Daniel's ex could carry the baby for you. She's still close to the family after all. It would make things easier for everyone." Mia's breath caught in her throat. She turned to Daniel, expecting him to shut it down immediately. But before he could say anything, Ellen nodded in agreement. "It's just a suggestion," Ellen said, her tone almost casual, as if she hadn't just shattered whatever was left of Maya's confidence. "We just want what's best for you two." The room fell silent, the weight of the suggestion suffocating. Maya stood up, her voice trembling with anger. "I'm not going to sit here and listen to this." Back in the car, Daniel's anger simmered beneath the surface, the silence between him and Maya heavy with unspoken words. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, the tension in his body palpable. Mia, sitting quietly beside him, could feel the anger radiating from him, but she didn't say anything. Her own mind was still reeling from the shock of what had been said, what had been proposed. "I can't believe they said that to you," Daniel muttered finally, his voice low but trembling with fury. "How dare they?" His words were laced with disbelief, as though even speaking them aloud made the situation more surreal. It wasn't just anger. There was a deep, hurt betrayal in his voice that Maya recognized all too well. They were his family, his mother and sister, people he had trusted to love and respect them both, to support their marriage. Instead, they had crossed a line neither of them had expected, and the audacity of it was overwhelming. Maya twisted the ring on her finger nervously, a habit she'd developed since the tension with his family had begun. "I don't know why I thought it would get better," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "Maybe I was just hoping. You shouldn't have to deal with this," Daniel cut in, his voice harder now, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "I'm done with it. We're not doing this anymore." Maya stayed silent. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this would be the turning point. But how many times had they walked away from his family's passive-aggressive remarks only to return weeks later, hoping things would improve? She was exhausted from the cycle. The next morning, Daniel wasted no time. He called a fertility clinic, determined to get answers. The waiting was excruciating, and as the weeks dragged on, Maya found herself caught between hope and dread. What if there was something wrong with her? What if, after everything, his family was right and she was the problem? But when the results finally came in, the truth hit Daniel hard. It wasn't Mia, it was him. His sperm count was lower than average, the kind of issue that could be worked around with medical help, but still, it was a shock. He had been so focused on defending his wife, so sure that the problem couldn't lie with him, that the reality left him feeling gutted. It wasn't long before anger replaced his shock. All those months of his family's snide remarks, all the passive-aggressive comments, had been for nothing. They had blamed Mia hurt her when the issue wasn't with her at all. Daniel had always known his family could be difficult, but this was too much. They had crossed every line. The next morning, Daniel made up his mind. He was going to confront them. Mia was hesitant, as always. She didn't want to escalate things any further, didn't want to pour gasoline on a fire that had already burned them both, but Daniel wouldn't budge. "They need to hear the truth," he told her, "and they need to understand that we're not playing by their rules anymore." When Daniel arrived at his parents' house later that day, there was an unsettling sense of calm. His mother, Ellen, greeted him with a warm smile, as if she had been waiting for him, expecting him. His sister Julia was already in the living room, sprawled across the couch, wine glass in hand, a self-satisfied smirk curling her lips. The atmosphere was almost celebratory, like they knew something Daniel didn't. "We were just talking about you," Ellen said, patting Daniel's arm. "I'm glad you've come around to see things clearly." Daniel's stomach twisted, but he didn't show it. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice low. Julia chimed in, her tone dripping with condescension. "We knew you'd eventually realize that Mia just isn't the right fit for you. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? This whole baby thing, if it were someone else, someone like..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew who she meant. Daniel felt the bile rise in his throat. His sister was talking about his ex, Julia's best friend, the woman his family had always thought was perfect for him. They had never fully accepted Maya, but now it was clear that their disdain ran much deeper than he had imagined. Julia's voice echoed in his head, the casual cruelty of her words cutting him like a knife. "I can't believe you actually considered her to carry your baby," Julia continued, as if this whole thing was a joke. "It would be for the best, don't you think? You'd get the grandchild and no one would have to..." Daniel cut her off, His voice sharp and unyielding. Stop. He pulled the envelope from his jacket, slapping it down on the coffee table between them. You think Maya's the problem. You've been wrong this entire time. I'm the reason we haven't gotten pregnant. Not her. Me. The room went deathly quiet. Ellen blinked, staring at the envelope as if it were a bomb that had just been dropped in the middle of their tidy little world. Julia's smirk vanished, her face hardening as she crossed her arms over her chest. What do you mean? Ellen asked, her voice faltering. She reached for the envelope but didn't open it, her hand shaking slightly. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. The tests, the results are clear. Maya's perfectly healthy. I'm the one with the fertility issue. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Ellen finally opened the envelope, scanning the results with wide eyes, her face growing paler by the second. Julia, however, was not so easily convinced. There must be some mistake, she said, her voice cold. This doesn't change anything. Maya's still… This changes everything, Daniel snapped, his patience frayed to the breaking point. You've treated her like she's not good enough, like she's a problem to be solved. But she's done nothing wrong. Nothing, and I won't let you continue to disrespect her. Ellen's face crumpled, a fragile mask of maternal authority cracking under the weight of reality. Daniel, we only wanted what was best for you. We thought… You thought wrong, Daniel said, his voice steady but cold. You've been cruel to her, and for what? Because she wasn't who you thought I should marry. Because you've been holding on to some fantasy that I'd end up with someone else? Julia's defiance wavered. She uncrossed her arms, staring at her brother as if seeing him for the first time. But there was no remorse in her eyes, only anger that she had been proven wrong. We've only ever wanted what's best for you, Ellen whispered, her voice barely audible now. We didn't mean for it to get like this. Daniel shook his head, the weight of their excuses doing nothing to soften his resolve. I'm done, he said, his voice calm but final. If you can't accept Mia and treat her with the respect she deserves, then you won't be a part of our lives. You won't meet your grandchild. You won't have a place in our future. I won't let you continue to hurt her. His mother's face twisted with a mixture of guilt and helplessness, but Daniel didn't wait for her to find the right words. There weren't any words that could undo the damage they had caused. Without another word, Daniel turned and walked out of the house, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through the now silent room. Back at home, Maya sat on the couch, her knees tucked up to her chest, her heart pounding in anticipation. When the door finally opened, she looked up to see Daniel, his face weary but resolute. It's over, he said softly, walking over to her and pulling her into his arms. They know the truth now, and I told them. I told them if they can't accept you, they don't get to be a part of our lives. Maya buried her face in his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt. But for the first time in months, they weren't tears of pain or frustration. They were tears of relief. She had always known how much Daniel loved her, but now he had proven it in a way that left no doubt. They had faced his family's worst, and they had come out stronger. Thank you, she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. Thank you for standing up for me. Daniel kissed the top of her head, holding her tighter. We're a team, Maya. No one comes between us, not anymore. As they sat there in the quiet of their home, they knew there would still be challenges ahead, but they also knew they could face them together, and that was all that mattered.
Thank you for watching this video. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing. I post stories like this on the regular. See you on the next one.